What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackmine, joined always by my man in the corner, producer Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, well, we are just about at the end of OTAs, heading into minicamp. Plenty to talk about. Cam Sutton obviously signed yesterday, but there's another slot corner that I think we got to start paying attention to. And while Cam is an upgrade and everything that you have to say about him is justified, but on the field, he might be their best option, there's another name that I want to start talking about. And I'm surprised that we haven't started to talk about yet. Meanwhile, some very wild, strange, just bizarre and doesn't make any sense details come out about Russell Wilson's contract that we're going to dive into and why it just makes zero sense. And then, as Pittsburgh radio does, they tossed out one wild trade proposal that we'll finish the show with because, you know, we're gonna save the nonsense for later and brush by it because it needs to be addressed. But we're gonna dive into it a little bit. And as always, we'll answer your questions. So please make sure that you're dropping those in the chat. Nick, it's a rainy one here in the Berg, heading to the final day of 2024 OTAs in the South Side. How you feeling, my friend?
I'm feeling pretty good. You know, it's sad that it's the last day of OTAs. It's been a lot of fun the last couple of weeks, seeing the clips, seeing the guys come back into Pittsburgh and talking a little bit, watching some actual football happen. But the end of OTAs, to me, it's making me a little bit more excited because that just means another phase of this offseason is behind us and we can get closer and closer to more and more real football.
Yes.
Mandatory minicamp coming up, which means everybody's going to be on the field, or you at least expect everybody to be on the field. And then that brief little break before we get to Latrobe, and then it's all gravy from there. So I'm excited that we're getting through these stages of the offseason.
Yeah, gravy is the best. It's all gravy. We're feeling real good about where the Pittsburgh Steelers are heading. It's going to be nice to get everybody out there. I think that's the biggest thing right now is you're kind of missing some stuff. You know, you're watching a lot of Nick Herbig, but there's really no physical contact during OTAs. So you're not really getting a good idea of the defensive linemen and those kind of guys. George Pickens hasn't been here in, I don't know, 2 weeks just about. So you want to see a little bit more of him with the quarterbacks and what that's going to bring and how big of a step he took forward. I mean, it's no issue for guys not to be here during organized team activities. At this point, you're looking really for the no-name guys more than you are the big guys. You're looking for the rookies. It's really important for that. And the quarterbacks, obviously. But for guys not to be here, no big deal. Minicamp is when everybody shows up. There's just an energy that comes with minicamp. When everybody's on the field, you're out there. The music is playing. It's a good time. It's a good time. Very excited to dive into it. Like I said, we're going to talk about a slot cornerback sleeper today that I think it's a good time to start keeping an eye on him. And it's a good time to start really diving into what the slot cornerback competition might look like when we get to Latrobe, and minicamp is obviously the start of that. But first, we're going to start with Russell Wilson. Came out yesterday from ESPN's Dan Graziano saying that the Pittsburgh Steelers tossed a very quote-unquote bizarre clause into Russell Wilson's contract, a vet minimum $1.3 million deal, I believe. Well, if he wants to leave, or if the Steelers want him to leave, $1.2 million, my apologies. If he wants to leave, or if the Steelers want him to leave, things are going to have to be negotiated because, quote unquote, Russell Wilson actually has a no trade clause in his Steelers contract, which is bizarre at $1.2 million. I've never seen that before, but it gives him some say in any trade, correct? You look at the situation and it's a weird one. It's a weird one. It doesn't mean anything. Now, anybody who's sitting around talking, the Steelers aren't going to trade Russell Wilson. No, duh. The Steelers are not going to trade Russell Wilson. But that's where this conversation starts, is you look at this and you just think about the bizarre, what are we making headlines of? And that's kind of what this conversation is sometimes you got to call out that we are just talking about nonsense, and this is a little bit of nonsense. Russell Wilson isn't going anywhere. The Pittsburgh Steelers would have no reason to trade him, and the only reason that they would trade him is if, well, he stunk and he got benched. And at that point, Russell Wilson's probably the best backup quarterback you could possibly have in the NFL. And if he was to get a trade offer, if the Pittsburgh Steelers were to get a trade offer at some point from the worst teams in football, the New York Giants, the Carolina Panthers, the Tennessee Titans, whoever you want to toss out there, there is literally zero chance that a 35-year-old Russell Wilson's going to look at his options and say, I'm going to ride the bench in Pittsburgh, or I'm going to go get another starting job in Carolina, New York, Tennessee, wherever, and go compete there. And he's going to say no. Makes no sense. I've never heard of a no trade clause in a 1-year, $1.2 million deal, especially for a guy that old who isn't guaranteed anything in Pittsburgh. I mean, it is nonsense. I'm going to let you give you a little piece here. How big of nonsense is it?
It's silly season. That's what it is. It's what do we make a headline out of? Like, and right now, a no trade clause for Russell Wilson on a 1-year deal. What? Who cares? Okay. Yep. Were they going to trade him anyway? He's supposed to be the starter in week 1. Where are we going to go between week 1 and what is it, week 7, 8 at the trade deadline, where it's like, oh, well, now they want to trade him in week 7 or 8. It's like, no, what are you going to do? Have Kyle Allen as your contingency plan going into the back half of the season? So I don't understand how this is a headline. I understand. I mean, sure, put it in the contract. It feels like it's such a small detail on a 1-year deal. Who cares?
Yeah.
But making a big deal out of it is a completely different set of craziness for June.
Yeah, there's literally one team in the NFL, and maybe, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but there's literally one team in the NFL outside of the Denver Broncos who would never in a million years try to trade for Russell Wilson, who could possibly look at Russell Wilson as an option if he got benched in Pittsburgh, and that's the New York Giants. Because besides that, I mean, the second option might be Tennessee, and I mean, I'd rather Mason Rudolph go out there and see what you got in him than go trade for Russell Wilson. Just doesn't make any sense. It is silly season is the start of all this. I love every second of it, but at the same time, I feel like this entire show, outside of the cornerback competition that we're going to dive into, when we were coming up with what to talk about today, it was a lot of, this is wild. I can't believe this is where we are in this part of it. There's actual football to be played, and this is what we're talking about. But for anybody who's out there trying to make a big deal out of this, anybody who's entertaining this at all and wondering, oh, well, what does this affect? It affects nothing. You could look at the situation and say most quarterbacks probably have a no trade clause in their contract. The only reason that this is a big one is because it's a 1-year, $1.2 million deal. And the Steelers, for right now, have no intentions of trading Russell Wilson. If he got benched, there's no intentions of trading Russell Wilson. He's as good of a backup quarterback as it comes in the NFL. And when the Steelers first signed Russell Wilson, or first had those conversations, I was told that the initial plan was hopefully Kenny Pickett beats him out in training camp, and Russell Wilson's the best backup quarterback in the NFL. Obviously, Kenny would have to beat him out in training camp instead of earn or just be handed the starting job or pole position, as Mike Tomlin wants to say. But I think it's just it means absolutely nothing. And if worst case scenario happened, the Pittsburgh Steelers did need to trade Russell Wilson, I'm pretty convinced that him and his agent would not sit around and say, nah, I think we're going to waste the final year or two of our career in Pittsburgh on the bench. I think that's what we're going to go for here, because that's certainly going to help our cause. No, not going to happen. No trade clause, whatever. I think the bigger storyline here is there a real quarterback competition? But we'll dive into that in Latrobe, maybe next week. I don't know. We'll get a little bit more by more as we go on. I want to answer Michael's question here before we dive into the slot cornerback sleeper, because Michael, we appreciate you as always. Adam Schefter reported yesterday that it's only a matter of time, not a matter of if, but when Brandon Aiyuk leaves the 49ers. Does this open the door again, possibly for the Pittsburgh Steelers? I mean, the door is still open, but I mean, let's be realistic. No, the Steelers are not paying $30+ million for Brandon Aiyuk. Brandon Ayuk's going to have to come down from that. I think Brandon Aiyuk is the beginning of the downfall of the wide receiver market. That's how I view this, because I don't think any team's going to be willing to trade for him and sign him to a mega deal. He's going to have to sit out a year if that's the decision that he stands with, or he's going to have to play for $14 million this season. If he does that, his market next year is massive. If he doesn't do that and he holds out, I bet you he takes a pretty significant drop off, because that's what the NFL does. If you sit out a year, bad things typically happen. I don't think the Steelers are in there. I was talking to somebody yesterday, actually, and the conversation that we were having was revolving very heavily around the Pittsburgh Steelers are not willing to give up a second-round pick, let alone a first-round pick for a wide receiver, and they have almost zero intentions of paying one that amount of money. So I would say Brandon Aiyuk is off the table at this point, even if the door is still open. I don't know. Your thoughts? You agree? Disagree?
I would Agree. And for the reasons we talked about earlier this week, we touched on the Brandon Aiyuk situation when we were talking about Cortland Sutton and after the Justin Jefferson contract, and just basically saying the Steelers are not in a position to pay a wide receiver that much money, no matter who it is. I mean, Justin Jefferson might be the exception, but as we learned after that contract signing, he was never even being close to available. So
Yep.
if it's not Justin Jefferson, then there's no way that the Steelers are in a position to pay anybody that much money. I mean, in a couple of years, they're going to pay George Pickens. And let's not forget, it's not like they have a rookie quarterback coming in here on a cheap deal. They have two quarterbacks that one of them's going to get paid next year. You would have to imagine, or at least the plan is that they're going to have to pay one of them next year. And you're not going to be able to afford to do that. Keep all the guys around that you're keeping to have this team be a wholesale team and not just a one guy team. And I don't think that bringing in Brandon Aiyuk for $35 million gets you anywhere closer, especially considering what you're going to have to give up on the back end.
Yeah, it's just it just at no point makes any sense. It made sense when the conversation was $25 million because you're paying a guy for what he's going to be, not what he is. And the wide receiver market was going to take a massive spike, and we knew that was happening. The wide receiver market has taken that massive spike. The Steelers missed out. That's okay. If this happened during the draft, they would have had a nice, promising deal in there for 25, 26, $27 million for Brandon Aiyuk. Now that it's 32, no chance, not happening. The Steelers just don't pay their guys that much money. They just don't do it. And they're not going to start doing it. Brandon Aiyuk is not a Minkah Fitzpatrick. He's not a TJ Watt. He's not a Cam Hayward. He's not a Ben Roethlisberger. He's not an Antonio Brown. Like, that's the thing is, if you look at who the Steelers have paid massive amounts of money to, like nearly record-breaking money to, it is the guys that are the best player at their position at the time. It's not the second. It's not the third. And I don't even think Brandon Ayuk's top 3. I don't know if Brandon Ayuk's top 5 in the wide receiver rankings. You could go down, and I'm sure that I'd have to like sit down and look at the list, but I think it's really tough to squeeze him in there. He's just benefiting from the right time. But again, I think it's going to come back to bite him in the butt. And when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, there's just no shot that the Steelers are going to trade a really high draft pick and go sign a guy for $32 million. Just not going to happen. Just not going to happen. And that's, I wish this transitioned into our wide receiver talk because it's wild, but I'm going to hold on to the nonsense. We're trying to protect this show from the nonsense today. That is our mission, is to keep you guys nonsense free as much as humanly possible. Let's talk about the cornerback competition. That's a big one. That's a real one. Very excited about the cornerback competition. Obviously, Cam Sutton shows up yesterday, immediately on the field, immediately playing in team drills. Very comfortable in the defense already. Nothing has changed since the last time he is here. Really, the only difference is he's got 2 different corners back there and a new safety because Minkah was still around, but Terrell Edmonds was the other guy, the running mate, instead of Deshaun Elliott. He's going to be the slot guy. He's viewed heavily right now as the favorite for the slot guy, but there's a sleeper out there. There's a guy that I've been watching practice for 3 or 4 days now, and yesterday it just clicked. I'm standing there next to Steven. We're talking to 2 other guys, and I just, who's 42? Why is he always out there with the first team? Who's 42 right now? And somebody's like, oh, that's Josiah Scott, former Eagle. I was like, why are we not talking about this guy? Why is nobody mentioning the player that the Pittsburgh Steelers are favoring as their top guy outside of Cam Sutton right now? Because truthfully, Anthony Averett has gone from promising veteran, probably has a shot to be the starting guy. The Steelers hope that this is their answer. They found their match as the slot guy to, in my eyes, in my opinion, fighting for any roster spot at all, because at this point he's playing more outside than he is inside. It's just not it's not as promising. He doesn't look as comfortable or as fluid. He hasn't impressed really through 3 weeks of OTAs, and I get it. It's only OTAs. We got all of training camp. But a guy like that, you kind of looked at to say, hey, make an immediate impact and come back out here and be the guy, claim your job rather immediately, especially over just a guy like Beanie Bishop. Hasn't done that. Now he's playing more on the outside than he is on the inside. And I think that's a sign that he's more on his way out than he is here to stay. Beanie Bishop he looks raw. He looks young. He looks inexperienced. He looks raw. He looks like an undrafted guy. Doesn't look like a guy that's going to make an impact on this roster. Looks like a dude who's going to be fighting for a roster spot. And I hope that he makes it. I think he's got a ton of potential. Then there's Josiah Scott, man. Guy who's played nearly 40 games in the NFL, has a couple of starts with the Eagles, went to the Super Bowl with the Eagles in 2022, has 2 interceptions that season. The guy's got 8 pass deflections, big special teamer during his career, showed up in Pittsburgh last year as a practice squad guy, got injured and then waived, ended up back in Philadelphia, then back in Pittsburgh this summer. He's playing a lot, man. And I think that he's a sleeper. From what I have been told, he is a dude that carries a lot of speed and a ton of athleticism and isn't really a, hey, this guy is a starter, he's got a ton of potential, but more so, this guy's been very reliable in the NFL and has been a name that can play special teams, can play corner, isn't going to give up the big play. And that's really all you're looking for as a backup. That's all you're looking for somebody to compete with Cam Sutton. Josiah Scott is a name that I think I'm starting to pay attention to. I'm starting to mark up as, if somebody's going to make this roster as a sleeper, I think Corey Trice and Darius Rush are no longer sleepers. I think those guys are, there's real potential here. The Steelers like what they see. Josiah Scott's my could do this. Could definitely do this. Him and Jalen Elliott. Jalen Elliott, safety Jalen Elliott. I want to talk to Jalen Elliott before I really dive into him, but I'm going to toss that name out there too. He's been impressive as well. Big communicator, making a lot of plays out there. But Josiah Scott, we jumped on the show. You said, I don't know who this guy is. I never heard of this guy until you texted me his name. You think that, really, since you don't know much about Josiah Scott and you haven't been there to really watch him, I'm going to ask you this question. Is it better to have that guy than an undrafted Beanie Bishop who you could probably put on the practice squad? And at the same time, like, how open are you to just handing the job to Cam Sutton?
I think you do need to have somebody that's able to push Cam Sutton, simply because, you look at what he did last year. It wasn't as bad as everybody's making it out to seem as far as his on the field work, obviously. But it wasn't great. You can't just hand him a starting position going into this season. But what I think is happening here is everybody got excited about Anthony Averett simply because that was the only option outside of an undrafted guy, where everybody was excited about Beanie Bishop. He was good with West Virginia, but you just said it. He looks raw out there, and that's going to happen with undrafted guys. To have a guy like Scott come in who has been on teams, who has been active over the past year, whereas Anthony Averett is a guy that, you just mentioned it with the last conversation. You take a year off from football, it gets hard to get back into it. So while we did have high expectations, it makes sense that he's going to come out a little bit slow after he hasn't been on a team for over a year. So that might be a little bit of what's happening, but I think it's good to have more competition than less, especially for a slot corner position that has been a question mark for the entire summer to this point. You can't have Cam Sutton come in day one and all of a sudden all the questions fade away. There needs to be somebody to push him.
I agree. I think that's the premise of every single position. And I get it. Joey Porter's like a guy, he's here. Dante Jackson's a guy that almost nobody's willing to label the starter except for me, but just because he's been that guy. Cam Sutton's a dude that wasn't here last year and he's been playing outside. Like, to go back into the inside, I think you got to prove yourself. And I don't think it's a real full-blooded competition, but it's just like the quarterback battle. It's exactly what we talked about with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. It doesn't have to be real for you to have a competition to make sure that your guy that you know is going to be the starter, that you feel confident in, feels a little bit of pressure. Pressure helps in the NFL. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for the guy to push Cam Sutton. And on top of that, you're looking for the guy that's going to be the backup to Cam Sutton. You're looking for the guy that's going to be here to be your number two. You're looking for the guy that, what if somebody goes down and Cam's got a bump to the outside, or Cam goes down and, somebody's got to fill his role. Who is that? That's Josiah Scott right now. And I feel pretty good about that. Josiah Scott's got, like, I don't know, last year, Elijah Riley had a spark. Chandon Sullivan looked good, but Elijah Riley had a spark. Josiah Scott doesn't have a spark. There's no spark. There's no big, this guy's just splashy and making a bunch of plays. He's just reliable. Like, there hasn't been a moment where you're like, man, dude, Josiah Scott got burnt there. Anthony Everett's getting burnt, man. Beanie Bishop's getting burnt. These guys are getting toasted out there. These guys, there hasn't been a Josiah Scott moment where you're like, super worried about that guy. I think he's a sleeper. Name to watch super early in the offseason. Want to see more Roman Wilson in the slot against him. Want to see more Darnell Washington line up there against him. Pat Freiermuth line up against him. I want to see him when he's really, really tested. Calvin Austin showing off the speed up the middle. I want to see all that before I'm willing to say anything more. But for right now, that's my name to watch. We could scratch Anthony Averett for right now. We could scratch Beanie Bishop, and I hope Beanie Bishop works out. I truly, truly do. I'm tossing Josiah Scott out there as my name to watch for the 53-man roster and the backup slot job as of right now, as we head into the last day of OTAs, beginning of minicamp. All right, before we answer all of your questions and make sure that you're tossing them in here, we lost it 20 minutes. We lasted 20 minutes into the show before we have to bring up some nonsense. And we're going to address the nonsense. It's going to go quick. It's got to be addressed. Everybody's asking me about it. If you checked my Twitter DMs, if you checked my Instagram DMs, it's just 80 to 90 people saying, are the Steelers going to trade for this guy? No. The answer is no. And we're going to shut it down real quick. We're going to be real smooth with it. But it's got to happen. Unfortunately, it's got to happen. So as soon as I drop this name, everybody's going to just leave. We won't say who said it until we read out the tweet. Okay. Quote, hypothetically speaking, would the Steelers trade a 2025 first round pick and a 2026 third round pick for CeeDee Lamb? For those of you who can't guess who said that, somebody from 93.7 The Fan, Andrew Filipponi, who I'm a big fan of Andrew Filipponi. I think he's great in the industry. I also think he knows exactly what he's doing when it comes to getting people riled up. And this is definitely something to get people riled up. CeeDee Lamb, same argument as Brandon Aiyuk. You're going to pay him a boatload of money. I think he's better than Brandon Aiyuk, but you're going to pay him a boatload of money and you're going to trade a first and a third round pick. I got a real short answer here. It's a no. You got a different answer for me?
No, I don't have a different answer for you. I'd like to see CeeDee Lamb on the Steelers, but again, in the reality of the situation, which again, like Pony, but again, the reality is often missing from some of his takes. And the reality of the situation, no, there is no reality in which the Steelers make this trade and spend all that money on CeeDee Lamb after we just had this discussion about Brandon Aiyuk. I mean, it's the same talk. And you even talked about, they don't pay players that. How about just wide receivers? Let's make it plain and simple. There's always a question of, well, will they even give their wide receiver a second contract? Or is it just, hey, we're going to use them and then good luck what you do in your future endeavors, because they're so good at drafting wide receivers. Yep. Why all of a sudden would they turn around and say, you know what, let's trade a bunch of draft capital and then pay this guy a lot of money? Because everything leading up to this point in our entire organization's history has been the antithesis of that. And we've been pretty successful, have the Pittsburgh Steelers. So again, out of the realm of possibility and reality in my eyes.
Yeah, it's look at the Steelers need a quarterback. They have to figure out their quarterback situation. They're not giving up a first round pick until they do that. I get that they need a number 2 wide receiver, but they don't need another superstar. And if they could get another superstar, awesome. That's great. But you're not going to hunt for a superstar when you don't need one. You just need a wide receiver 2, and you need a wide receiver 2. It's very important to go get one. It's very, very important to go get one. But I'm telling you that you could start scratching off the CeeDee Lambs, the Brandon Ayuks, the Deebo Samuels, all those things. Like, it's just not the DK. I told you guys last week, I talked about DK Metcalf. I called someone that I trust heavily when it comes to Pittsburgh Steelers inside and what they're going to do, and a source that has never steered me wrong before. And I didn't even ask, is there a possibility? I just said, everybody keeps tossing out the name DK Metcalf after June 1st, and he laughed. The response I got was a laugh. Not happening. Look it. CeeDee Lamb, cross him off the list. Brandon Aiyuk, cross him off the list. Deebo Samuel, cross him off the list. Anybody worth $30+ million a year and a first-round pick, cross him off the list. It's not going to happen. The Pittsburgh Steelers aren't looking for it. Courtland Sutton's the name, dude. We're going to talk about a wide receiver. Courtland Sutton's the name. He's the only one that makes sense. And until something else changes or you hear something wild, cross it off the list. CeeDee Lamb ain't happening. Sorry, Pony. Appreciate you. Definitely appreciate you, but not happening. All right. Let's dive into some questions here.
We got a bunch of them. Let's start with Cross that says, love you guys. Will the Steelers extend Justin Fields next year? And we also got another question here from Robert along the similar line saying, what are your thoughts about giving Fields a 2-year, $32 million contract with $20 million guaranteed for the 2025-26 season? And would he take that?
So, Cross, appreciate you as always. Love you guys as well. What I think he would take that. I look at Justin Fields' best opportunity is in Pittsburgh. It's going to remain in Pittsburgh. There's a reason that he came here, knowing that he'd have to compete with Russell Wilson, knowing that this wasn't going to be an easy gig. I think that the stars are aligning. He's going to learn the offense this year. Russell Wilson's going to be good, but I don't think he's going to be good enough to stay for another year. It makes too much sense for both sides, and Justin Fields is not going to be expensive. No matter who signs him next year, he's not going to be expensive. Nobody's signing Justin Fields for $25 million a year. It's just not going to happen. 32 might be a little low, $16 million a year, $20 million guaranteed. You might have to juice that up to maybe like $18 to $20 million, or even if you backload it so that year two is more so on the 20 plus side. I think that makes sense. But I don't think Justin Fields is going anywhere for a massive deal. I think his value is actually going to decrease. And the quarterback market is tough right now. There are not teams out there who need a quarterback. And the quarterback class of 2025, every year, everybody's like, it's not a good one. There's always guys. There's always guys, and there's not going to be a Kenny Pickett draft class for the next couple of years. I could see them extending Fields. I think that's the most likely outcome of the scenario. 2 years, 32 million, 20 million guaranteed. I think you're like almost in the ballpark. I could see like more so like 36 million a year, maybe 40 million a year, and then you backload it. But or 40 million total, and then you backload it. But I think you guys are in the ballpark. Let's answer Chris's next, because we appreciate him. He tosses a couple bucks.
Chris says, Noah, I like the Steelers defense this year, but I'm really worried that we need a run-stopping defensive tackle like Casey Hampton used to be for us. Do you have some thoughts on this?
So I want to start off by saying this. Casey Hampton showed up to OTAs the first week of OTAs, first day of OTAs, actually. And, dude, he's so skinny. It's wild. Wild how lean this dude is. Like, I looked at him and I was like, is that Casey Hampton, man? What are we doing here? Crazy. Great. I want to go ask him his workout plan, because look, I got a week before the wedding, but I got to still shed a couple of pounds. He looked like he did it pretty quickly. Crazy stuff. Comes to a run stuffing defensive tackle. I agree with you, but I think Dean Lowry helps that a lot. I think that's who he is. I think Isaiah Loudermilk is going to take on a bigger role this year. I think that helps a lot as well. And I think playing Keanu Benton consistently, for a whole year, let him develop, move him over to defensive tackle a little bit more. I think the more those guys are on the field, the better for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Larry Ogunjobi's a pass rusher. Cam Hayward's a little bit of both, a little bit of everything. Montravius Adams is strictly a pass rusher, no run stuffer. But I think they have the options. I think they have guys to fill those roles. And I also think that having a guy like Patrick Queen, having a guy like Peyton Wilson, having more options in the inside linebacker room is going to help that as well. I view it as, and Nick Herbig. Nick Herbig's taken a step forward this year, and then having Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt as a 3 linebacker set. Alex Highsmith's a great quality run stuffer, and I think you could kind of put him in a gap and tell him to rush from there, and I think he helps that cause a lot as well. I agree with you. I don't think there's anybody that really stands out as like, this is the dominant run stuffer that the Pittsburgh Steelers need, but I think they have options, and I think if those options continue to take steps forward, they're in a good spot.
Still Cold wants to know, back to the quarterbacks, do you believe the Steelers end up drafting a quarterback in the first or the second round of next year's NFL draft?
It's too early to tell. I'm going to say that. It's too early to tell. I think Justin Fields plays a pretty significant role in that. If the Steelers like Justin Fields, and we'll know by the end of the summer if the Steelers like Justin Fields, if he's got no shot, if he looks terrible at training camp, and there's just no hope for this guy, even if they're going to give him an opportunity next year, they're going to draft somebody to compete with him. If he looks good and they think he's the future and they're very excited about the potential of what he brings, I think that they could draft a quarterback in the middle of the draft, the 3rd, 4th round. I don't know about 1st, 2nd. But I think that if Justin doesn't look good and the Steelers find themselves as a 1st-round exit in the playoffs, or just barely squeaking into the playoffs, or barely missing the playoffs, somewhere around there, I would say yes. But we'll know more. That's a good question. Ask it again August. If you ask it in August, I'll have a really good answer for you, I promise. But for right now, it's kind of a wait-and-see thing.
James has a question on one of the rookies saying, how has Ryan Watts been looking lately? Do you see him getting any significant playing time this year? Maybe a key role as a special teamer.
Yeah, I like Ryan Watts, to be honest with you. I was a little down on him, a little skeptical of what he could bring to the Steelers defense, but I think he's got a lot of speed. He's got a lot of size. He's physical. I think he's looked pretty impressive. Like he hasn't really taken a step forward. He's not competing for a job or anything, but I think he's a good bottom of the depth chart guy. I think he's a guy that could come in here and you could kind of utilize him wherever. Could be a special teamer. I think he's got a bunch of that potential. He's got the size. You're not going to let him go. You know, like that's the thing about him is you're not going to look at a Ryan Watts and say, "Oh man, he's 6'4" and really physical, could play cornerback and safety. We're gonna waive him and put him on the practice squad. Let somebody try to get him." I don't think that's going to happen. I think that they keep him and put him on special teams and try to work his way into the defense. I've been impressed with Ryan Watts, to be honest with you. If we're going to name guys that I think going into training camp are potential sleepers here, it's to make the roster, bottom of the depth chart guys to make the roster. Ryan Watts, Josiah Scott, and Jalen Elliott are my three to start keeping an eye on, and I think he's got potential.
Teeman wants to know, do you guys think that bringing back Patrick Peterson would complete the secondary? Just his veteran leadership and versatility is so valuable. So do you think Patrick Peterson needs to be the next addition, or do you think that the secondary is already completed with the addition of Cam Sutton?
Yeah, I think the secondary is done, and I think it's a good spot right now. I think it's in a really, really, really good spot. Cam Sutton comes in here. You now have three starters that you could rely on very heavily. I think that's as good as it gets. You hope that Darius Rush and Corey Trice continue to take steps forward, but you don't want to take anything away from them. I think that's massive as well. I look at the secondary and say they're in probably the best spot they've been in a couple of years. I feel really good about where they are. I don't think Patrick Peterson comes back to the Steelers. I think if they find out that Corey Trice or Darius Rush just isn't it, maybe. But I think for right now, they're pretty good. They're pretty set.
Excuse me. Chris has a question here saying, with the heavy run offense, I think the two tight end set is going to be a feature for Arthur Smith's offense. With a weak wide receiver room, could you see Muth and Darnell Washington both having huge seasons?
Massive seasons. I think Pat Freiermuth is going to have his best year in the NFL, and I think Darnell Washington takes a pretty big step forward. I'm not saying massive. I'm not saying this dude's going to be the superstar tight end that the Steelers have been waiting for, and he pushes Pat Freiermuth out. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying, plain and simple, I think Darnell Washington is going to take a step forward, and I think he's got a ton of potential. I think he's going to be used in the right ways, because that's the thing is Matt Canada had no idea how to use a dude who doesn't know how to run routes but is 6'7". Like, there's a specific skill set here. Matt Canada didn't know how to use it. So I think Arthur Smith knows how to utilize that, when to utilize that. I have a feeling that 13 personnel is going to be really, really big for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think both of these guys have big years, definitely.
Peter Swistock wants to know, do you think any of the UDFAs even make the 53-man roster this season?
Yeah, I think Beanie Bishop has a pretty good shot to make the roster. And then I think John Rice Plumlee has a shot to make the practice squad, just because, I mean, if you're swapping, I don't know how it happened, dude, but John Plumlee is not playing quarterback for the Steelers. Like, he's just not. He's returning kicks. He's working with wide receivers. He's standing by the quarterbacks, but he's not playing quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But Mike Tomlin loves him, dude. I don't know if everybody saw the picture last night on Mike Tomlin's Instagram of him. They were at the rookie dinner or whatever, the luncheon, and he's wearing John Plumlee's name tag. Like, that's a sign that you are in with the coach, man. They like you there. I could see him making the practice squad. I like John Plumlee a lot. Beanie Bishop would be my undrafted guy that I think has an actual shot to make the roster. And I think that's going to be based solely off of potential and the fact that they don't want him to walk and then sign somewhere else. So I'm going Beanie Bishop as a bottom of the depth chart, not active on game days guy, and John Plumlee as a practice squad guy.
Peter also has another question asking, as of right now, can you predict who you think from the cornerback room is going to make the actual 53-man?
Yeah, I could go right through the list here. So we'll start with, obviously, the starters: Dante Jackson, Cam Sutton, Joey Porter Jr., Corey Trice, Darius Rush are going to be there. I would guess Josiah Scott makes the roster as well. Ryan Watts, and then Beanie Bishop. What's that give us? 7? I think that's 7. And then I think you keep 4 safeties in maybe 5. Maybe 5 safeties. I think I don't know. I think there's competition. I think there's definitely competition. Beanie Bishop might be the odd man out there. But if I had to guess, I think everybody up until Beanie Bishop, Ryan Watts is a lock. Those two, they're going to have to prove themselves. But if I had to guess, they make the roster.
Chris reacted to something you said earlier and saying, so Calvin Austin hasn't blossomed yet? I'll take it.
Yeah. So Calvin Austin, I think, is definitely taking steps forward. But I don't think Calvin Austin is a number 2 right now. I don't think Roman Wilson's a number 2 right now. I think Van Jefferson might be the closest thing to one. Maybe Quez Watkins might be the closest thing to one, but I don't think any of these guys are number 2s. I think right now they're number 3s. They're gadget guys. They're useful in different positions and different ways, and they'll be utilized. They'll make massive impacts, but you just look around the league, and like that's the thing is like people are like, the Steelers don't need a number 2. Look at the teams that make the Super Bowl. Go look at those teams. Don't look at the Kansas City Chiefs. They don't count. You know, Kansas, you got Patrick Mahomes. You don't need anybody else. You can figure it out. But you go look at the Philadelphia Eagles. They got 2 great wide receivers. The 49ers, they got 2 great wide receivers. You look at, again, Baltimore shouldn't count because you're Lamar Jackson and your team's Lamar Jackson. The Steelers don't have a Patrick Mahomes. They don't have a Lamar Jackson. The Cincinnati Bengals, they have 2 great wide receivers. Like there's just the Buffalo Bills had 2 really good wide receivers. The Steelers need that second guy. They need somebody else to make sure that they have options, and that's what it comes to. But I think the rest of that, like you need options who are really good number 3s, number 4s. Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, they're those guys, and they're good at being those guys.
Along that same vein, Joe has a question saying, hey guys, do you think the Steelers are trying to find a good wide receiver that won't take attention away from Pickens? We all know his history. Do you think they're being cautious about their next signing? Do you think his personality and off-field antics are a reason into what the Steelers are looking for as their next wide receiver too?
Yeah, I don't think that they care what George Pickens thinks. I think that the caution from the fan base is respected, and it's right, it's correct, it should be there. I don't think that they could care at all if somebody comes in here and takes targets away from George Pickens. And if they think that George Pickens is going to care, they could care less. Because that's the thing. If George Pickens wants to drama himself out of Pittsburgh, they'll let him do that. You know, like they're not going to just cater to somebody so that they could stink. They're going to try to be the best team humanly possible. I don't think that George Pickens' emotions or anything go into this. And to be honest, I don't think that you could go trade for a wide receiver and George Pickens is going to be mad about it. Like, I don't think George is going to come in here and be like, I can't believe we just got better. That's ridiculous. You know, I don't think that's the case. I think if the offense comes to a place where he never gets the football, things are going to be iffy. But I think right now, like, I think he just wants to win like the rest of the Pittsburgh Steelers team.
Another quick shout out to Joe, by the way, earlier in the episode said, hey, Nick and Noah, you guys are great. Just tuning into your cast makes my day. You guys are very informative. I love your takes on the Steelers, and the latest update talks are awesome. So you highlighted that. I know you wanted to throw a little bit of love back to Joe.
Yeah, Joe, appreciate you as always. Appreciate all you guys. So just wanted to make sure that we noted that.
Steeler Lee has a question here. It says, what is the time frame, if there even is one, for a Mike Tomlin extension?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest with you. I think it's going to happen before the season. I think it's going to happen before training camp. If I had to guess, it happens while I'm on my honeymoon because that's what the Steelers do. But I think it's going to be 2 years, 3 years, something like that. And I think it comes before training camp. I can tell you this, dude. Mike does not care whatsoever about a contract extension. The Steelers could care less about a contract. It's like us. You know what I mean? Like if me and you were hanging out here and a contract was coming to an end, neither side would be sitting around going like, oh man, dude, I wonder if a deal's going to get done. No, we'd both be like, yeah, dude, we got things going on. We're trying to win football games or create great shows. That's going to happen. We're not worried about it. You know, that's how the Steelers are. At both sides, everybody knows it's going to get done. So I wouldn't be worried about it. Time frame, I get your question. It's a really good question. I would say before training camp.
And that's a wrap for today's questions.
Awesome. With that said, Sorry, I saw a Juju question. Just it wasn't an actual question, but just making sure. With that said, we're gonna head out of here, guys. Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. And as we've been saying, please go subscribe to our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk clips for even more of the show. I'm heading to OTA's final day, and then minicamp starts next week. So make sure to go check all that out at si.com/NFL/Steelers. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.